When we last saw our heroes, they were doing all the things they normally do. But today, they do something different. This is the Q&A episode. All right, so it is still in ATP time, Friday the 4th of August, but most of you listening are probably listening somewhere on or around the 9th of August, and we did this because, as we covered last episode, we didn't plan our vacations well. In any case, so yeah, we're going to do a Q&A episode. So we had being the keyword, solicited questions via Twitter.
Are you telling our audience to please stop asking questions now? Is that what that means?
Well, you can certainly continue to ask questions, but we are not planning another Q&A episode for at least a year. So you can ask, but they're pretty much going into the ether.
But what about the Ask ATP segment that we're going to add to the show?
Yeah, I would like to keep the questions going.
Oh.
I mean, they don't have to be as many questions because we're going to answer like 2 of them, but...
All right, the hosts have spoken. We have
just 2 or 3 people ask a question every week. You figure it out amongst yourselves. You coordinate, and then.
All right, fair enough. So we are going to do this in quasi chronological order. We have selected questions.
Idea. Because here's the thing: they were going into the spreadsheet, but I was afraid if I tried to sort them that it would like mess with the automate. I don't know, like. Whatever. Yeah, we're going to go from top to bottom in this document.
I think you can't see the document. You can't see.
I think it turns out that adding every single tweet with this hashtag to a giant spreadsheet and having no way to like filter or upvote or sort them at all might not be the best tool for this job. Turns out.
Well, I am happy for you to coordinate the replacement, my friend, because this seemed like the lowest impact way to me. I agree with you, it is not ideal, but it's the lowest impact version I got.
Are we supposed to be using things like Reddit? Is that a thing? Are we supposed to be doing
that? Yeah, that is what the Reddits are for, isn't it?
No, we're not supposed to be doing that.
All right, that's question number 1, answered. All right.
All that said, if anyone on the show or off the show wants to make a replacement that's better than the spreadsheet, I will endorse it.
It would be. We probably should have some way to like upvote or downvote, and some way for like one of the admins, which should be us, to say like, all right, this question we're just not going to answer, so just kill it.
Yeah, but like unlike Reddit, I'm not sure this needs to be publicly accessible. But whatever.
All right, let's do it.
Okay, so the show notes for this episode may or may not exist. We'll see what happens. But because it's basically just a bunch of questions and answers. And so I'm just going to try to MC this and do the best I can with names, with questions, etc. And we're going to dig in with Gulick, who asks, hey, why no more toaster reviews, John?
The toaster reviews were a sponsorship, believe it or not. I know you don't remember that, but like they weren't just like, hey, review a bunch of toasters. They're actually ads for Cards Against Humanity. But instead of an ad read, they wanted me to do toaster reviews. So they are not advertising, quote unquote, advertising on the show anymore. They don't have any other campaigns. So that's why there's no more toaster reviews. And if they did, they wouldn't do toasters again. So you're not going to get any more toaster reviews.
And we have had many people suggest new things that we could have a series of reviews for. And honestly, none of them sounded as funny as that. Like, that was such a great thing. It had a wonderful progression. It ended. I don't think it could have continued indefinitely. I think it was pretty much done when it ended. And every other suggestion we've seen since then has been less funny. So, yeah, nobody has tackled anything more than that. And I think it probably won't happen. At least in that format.
And those suggestions weren't from sponsors, right? The sponsorship is the key part of the toaster. Because I don't think we would have endured, like, in the middle of a tech podcast, let's talk about toasters for 5 minutes, unless it was a sponsorship behind it.
Yeah, like, and I think one of the funniest things about that was, like, Cards Against Humanity, and we later came to learn that the person who was organizing all this there was Alex Cox, now of Dubai Friday fame. So like, they really... they weren't just sending random toasters. Like, there was a clear progression, like getting like from the normal ones slowly into the really bizarre and crazy and horrible things, like those big like breakfast stations that could make the egg on top and stuff like that. Like, it was clearly in this wonderful progression that it was just so well done, and you got to give Cards Against Humanity credit for that incredible run.
Yeah, completely agree with you. Kathy Wise writes in, what cameras are you using now? And so I will begin. I'm using the same camera that we got shortly before Declan was born. That's an Olympus OMD EM10, which is a truly terrible name. It is a Micro Four Thirds camera. I have a prime lens for it. That is what I use, generally speaking. And if you remember from the last episode, which in ATP time happened about 15 minutes ago, I also have a zoom lens, which I actually quite like. And I was going to argue with you, Marco, when you were saying, oh, you can't get a zoom lens that, covers all three parts of the triangle, if you will. But as you were talking, you had mentioned, well, if you do have a decent zoom lens, that means it's exorbitantly expensive and still probably has some other concessions. And that is the case for me. The zoom lens I have was like $800 or something like that. And otherwise, it's very nice. It's f2.8. I think it's 100 to 300 millimeters in regular cameras. I forget what it is in a Micro Four Thirds. But anyway, I like it a lot, but it was very expensive. Marco, what are you using?
I am mostly using my iPhone, which makes me sad, but that is the reality of it. We do have the 5D Mark IV now in our family. Like we actually had we had for years, ever since they came out. We had the 5D Mark II, which came out I think in 2007 or 2008, something like that. And it was late 2008. And so we had that since then, and it was great, but it was getting long on the tooth in a lot of different ways. And so for a little while, I had a Sony phase, and because the Sony A series of cameras, first I had the little RX1, then I had the A7R2, and those are awesome cameras in a lot of ways. But I found, I'll make it brief because we've talked about this before, I have found that I generally preferred the speed and handling and battery life of full-sized SLRs to the little Sony mirrorless cameras. And I think over time that will probably eventually change back as the little Sonys get better. The A9 has now come out, and it solves some of the problems I had. It makes certain things worse. So maybe there will be an A7R3 at some point, or an A9 Mark II or something like that I might go back for. But for now, I'm very happy in the world of big Canon SLRs when I need fancy photos. But I take fancy photos less and less every year. My wife takes them much more often, and she is way, way better of a photographer than I am. So most of like the good pictures of our family and stuff are taken by her, and so that kind of frees me up to do mostly the casual stuff. So I'm shooting mostly on my iPhone if I shoot anything at all.
I'm still using my Sony A6300. I thought of trading in for a 6500. That was right up until I saw that the battery life was slightly worse, and that really much did it for me because the battery life in 6300 is just barely enough. Like I have two batteries, and on vacation I never needed to swap the batteries, even on a day at the ocean, but I come close, and so I don't think I can give up that whatever 10% battery life. And the 6500 is more expensive, and so I've never done the swap. I'm still looking at it. I'm still, I would still recommend the 6500 over the 6300 as long as you can deal with the battery life, but be sure that you can, because that's a big quality of life issue. So I'm happy with that. The only new lens I got recently is that big zoom. I forget which one it is, but it's one of the Sony ones. It's not a very good lens. Like whatever. What is it? 55 to 300. So it's a pretty big range. Again, adjusting for what that is on a APC sensor, it's not, those are the full frame numbers. Still like my 50mm prime the best. I have my own super expensive zoom that does 16 to 70 and is over $1,000. And that is my sort of general all-purpose lens that I keep on the thing. It's not as good as the 50 prime, and it doesn't zoom as long as the big zoom, but it's kind of a nice all-arounder. And to get a reasonable, okay all-arounder, $1,000. So, yeah.
Indeed. Also from Kathy Wise, did the last show, which was actually 2 shows ago, if I'm doing this mental math right, shame you into clearing out your application folders? No, it did not.
Nope.
John?
Not only did it not shame me into cleaning out my application folder, but I realized after we finished that show that I was just looking at / applications. I also have a / applications with way more things in it. Way more things in it, which is that's like an old school next early Mac OS 10 era thing of having an applications folder in your home directory, which you can totally have, and the OS knows about it and gives it the little A icon, but only weird people do that.
All right, moving on. Oples asks, which ad blocker do you guys did actually Marco choose? It's not you guys. Which ad blocker did Marco choose?
I'm kind of, I was for a long time. So as soon as I killed Peace, within I think a month or two, I stopped using it too. And you kind of, just to be fair, it kind of felt wrong for me to use it, and no one else did. I switched to One Blocker back then, and One Blocker is fine. I don't have really much bad to say about it, or much great to say about it. It's just, if you're going to go with one of those mass market blockers, One Blocker at the time I looked was the best one. I have noticed though over time more and more sites are broken by it. And there was one of the iOS 11 betas where it was not working due to some limits that had changed. So I went looking, and I started using Better, which is better.fyi. It's a paid app. I think it's like $5. They have a Mac version and an iOS version, which is nice, and the Mac version kind of keeps itself up to date, which is nice with this little like menu bar extra thing. So I've been trying Better out. It doesn't seem to block as much stuff as One Blocker, but it also doesn't break as many sites, and it seems to block enough that works for me, and it seems to get regular updates. So right now I'm using Better, but I've only been using it for maybe a few weeks at most, so it's hard for me to really say you should definitely go buy this. But if you're looking to buy something right now, that's the one I would start with.
John, any thoughts? I also use One Blocker for the record, but John, any thoughts?
I'm also using One Blocker, but occasionally, I don't know if the OS updates do it or something. Sometimes it gets turned off and I don't notice for a while. I don't have a good blocker situation going on. And half the time when things don't work, I do the little long hold down on the reload to reload without blockers to see if that's the problem.
Me too.
I think some sites are getting more obnoxious. One, I think the Boston Globe is like, you're running an ad blocker, or I don't like you, whatever. And it's like, all right, well, fine. I got to learn not to even tap those links. And some site, I think it's like the Atlantic or something like that, is like, sorry, something is wrong and we can't serve you ads. And so I reload without content blockers, and it says the same thing. Like, well, what do you want me to do?
Nice.
Like, or like you're running an incognito mode. It's like, I'm not in incognito mode. I'm just on my phone and I want to read your website, and I turn everything off, and you still, and the worst thing is it does it with like a sheet that goes down over the actual article, and you just want to like right click and inspect and delete node, but you can't because you're on your phone. It's like, these are when Casey occasionally goes off on his little angry rants about how he feels constrained by iOS. I have that in small degrees too, and it's basically whenever I do anything on a web page and I realize I don't have access to my web developer tools, and I feel just completely crippled. It's like, it's just a stupid web. It's just a freaking div. Let me delete it. Like, I just saw the article. It's right there. So here's what I do. This is what I literally do. To find out if I want to actually read the article, I either long press to read the slug in the URL, hoping that it's something sensible, but sometimes it's not. Or I repeatedly revisit the page and try to read the headline before the stupid thing slides down on it. Like, I get, 3 words in, it slid down. And then I reload 3 words in just to find out, is this a story that I want to bother going to a quote-unquote real web browser and, looking at or whatever. Anyway, websites are annoying.
You guys try way too hard to, like, if a site makes it difficult for me to read an article, I just close it and I move on. Because, like, you know what? No matter how good of a writer you are, or no matter how great of journalists you are, or whatever else, there's a lot of things to read out there on the web. And if you're going to make it hard for me to read yours, I'm just not going to read it. And that might be, like, if you have a site with, like, an anti-ad blocker thing, if you won't let me read the site with an ad blocker, that's fair game. I respect that decision of yours. But that means I'm not going to turn off my ad blocker. I'm just not going to read it. Like, but if that's the option you presented, then fine.
That's what I'm saying. Like, I'm willing, like, I've detected you have an ad blocker. Like, fine. I will turn off my ad blocker. I'll turn it off. I'll be like, wait, reload without content blockers. Here I am. I'm ready to see your thing. It's not behind a paywall. It's not like they want me to sign up, subscribe, or pay money. Like, the site is just broken, is what I'm saying. I think it's a pretty well-known site. Maybe it's the Atlantic or whatever. It's like, I'm doing everything you want me to do. Turn off all my blockers, turn them off in settings, not be in incognito mode. There's no paywall. You're not asking me to sign up or subscribe. You just, every time I try to load it, it's like, sorry, I couldn't figure out something, and I'm going to slide a big animated sheet down over the article that's perfectly good. And there's no reader mode for people asking. There's no, websites, man. Like, do you ever test on the iPhone? It's a popular platform.
We are sponsored this week by Warby Parker, making buying glasses online easy and risk-free. Get your free home try-ons today at warbyparker.com/ATP. Warby Parker believes that eyeglasses should not cost as much as a phone. They offer prescription eyeglasses and sunglasses starting at just $95, including the lenses. They make buying glasses online easy and risk-free with their home try-on program. This allows you to order 5 pairs of frames, and you get to try them on for 5 days. And there's no obligation to buy. It ships to you for free, and it includes a free prepaid return label. And all you got to do is pick out what you want, and they'll send you this box of home try-ons. You can try them, you can show people in your life, you can look in the mirror, you can take pictures, whatever you want to do to decide what's right for you. And there's no obligation. You don't have to buy any of them. But I bet you will, because they're really high-quality glasses. My wife has a bunch of these, and they are just wonderful. And they come with great accessories, a nice hard case, a cleaning cloth. And for every pair you buy, a pair is distributed through Worldwide Vision charities to someone in need. Warby Parker really believes in giving back to the world, and they really make great glasses, and they're helping the world, too, with these charities. Get a free home try-on program today. You will be shocked how nice these glasses are. They're trendy designs. They have anti-glare and anti-scratch coatings. And they even have a home try-on companion feature, which allows you to use their iPhone app to preview how the glasses will look on your face. You can stitch it into a video. You can share it with friends to help you pick a winner. So even before you get the frames mailed to you in the home try-on program, you can preview how they're going to look on you. And then you can educate your guesses that way. It's so they make it so easy to buy glasses online, and the value here is incredible. All of this starts at just $95. And they also offer sunglasses, non-prescription starting at just $95, prescription starting at just $175. Just like their eyeglasses, their sunglasses are also available through their home try-on program. They have premium polarized lenses that are scratch-resistant and provide 100% UV protection. So check it out today. Warby Parker offers such a great value, such great glasses for starting at just $95. Go to warbyparker.com/ATP to get that free home try-on kit started, and you'll see for yourself how great they are. Thank you very much to Warby Parker for sponsoring our show.
All right, Jack Johnson, yes, from New York City, apparently, has 2 questions that are related. Do you think it would be a good move for iTunes to offer a higher resolution audio file for download or streaming? And then kind of tangentially related, do you think part of the HEVC strategy is to set the groundwork for 4K streaming? I will say that I don't think anyone really cares, except Marco, about higher resolution audio coming out of iTunes. And
I don't even care about that.
I'm surprised.
So as for all my audiophile-ness when it comes to selecting headphones and stuff, I have never been swayed by higher than CD quality audio files or lossless compression schemes. I know a lot of people like these. A lot of people think they can hear a difference. I don't think you can, but I know for sure that I can't.
All right, hold on, though. Hold on. How do you download your Fish concerts?
MP3. They offer FLAC options.
I am stunned. That's what I assumed you were going to say.
No, they offer FLAC for a few more dollars. And there is, so I have bought, so quick background here. Fish sells all their live shows legally through their own site, a few hours after the shows end. And so you can buy a season pass, and you can basically have downloads of every show they do for a whole tour. So I do this. I've been doing this since something like 2009 or so. And there was one tour early on that I bought in FLAC. I pre-ordered it, and I'm like, gosh, let me get the FLAC version. I'll see if it sounds any different. And it was such a pain because, first of all, iTunes didn't support FLAC at the time. I think it actually is finally adding that in High Sierra, I think, but it didn't at the time. And so I had all these massive files that, first of all, I didn't want to ever delete them because, I paid for these massive files. So they're taking up tons of space in the hard drive. Then I still had to transcode them to make them actually playable in anything. I did play the original ones, or there was, let's see, I think one time I transcoded them to ALAC, or maybe I downloaded, maybe they sold them as ALAC, I forget. But so I did, for a group of them, transfer them and play them as lossless files, as ALAC files in iTunes. And I couldn't tell any difference at all. And there's lots of people who claim they can hear a difference. There's a whole lot of tests that have been done that have shown mostly otherwise. But this is one of those things, kind of like my subwoofer thing from last episode of I do things my way, and some people consider them insufficient, or some people want better things. And I think I can't care anymore. If you want to do things your own way, if you want to get massive files with 2496 or 192 sample rates, and if you want to have lossless encoding and you want your albums to take up a gig each, fine. It's hard drive space is cheap. Do whatever you want.
Well, I could not possibly agree with you more, but I was expecting to snicker as you told me about how FLAC is the only answer. So kudos to you, sir. I am stunned.
Do you want audio that's lower quality and has like hiss and pop in it?
Oh,
no.
Here we go. Here we go.
Something for Casey.
Yeah, exactly.
I like. Mm-hmm. I think it's not the right move for Apple to offer higher resolution audio, but if Apple ever gets to that point, I don't think they will, because again, streaming is what everyone cares about now, as Marco pointed out earlier / on the last show. But it would be a way to make the Ferrari of purchasable downloadable music. Hey, can we charge more money for something that people perceive as better? The answer is yes, you can. You sell lossless or higher bit rate or some combination thereof, and a very small number of people who think that is worthwhile for them will buy it. It doesn't really matter if anyone can hear the difference. It only matters whether they'll give you money in exchange for these goods, which are able to be produced. So I wouldn't totally rule it out. I don't think it's something Apple needs to do at all. But someday, if buying music at all downloadable continues to be a thing, some smart person in marketing may say, we're leaving money on the table by not selling high-resolution audio. And they'll just do it and charge more money for it, and a couple people will buy it, and there'll be a tiny bump in a graph, and someone will get a good performance review.
Yeah, and you're right. Like, the thing is, like, there is demand for this. There's absolutely demand for higher than CD quality sample rates and everything, and higher bit rate formats, or more advanced formats, or lossless formats. There is definitely demand for that. Like, most people don't even know, like, people who listen to the show probably aren't aware quite how many options there are for what basically amount to fancy iPods that sell today for like $400 or more. That they're Sony makes a bunch of them. They're basically like little, pocketable portable audio players that size like a deck of cards, like that kind of size class, that have a headphone just like the old iPod Classic, that play these super high bitrate files. Like, they could actually output them and decode them with a fancy DAC and everything else. This market exists. People buy these things for like $400. But not a lot of people. And there are streaming services, things like Neil Young's Pano, things like even Tidal, which is a fairly decently sized streaming service now. Like, streaming services that have either been or even music sales service. I don't think Pano even was streaming. I think it only sold stuff if it even still exists. But anyway, there are services that will either sell you high bitrate music legally, or that will let you stream them, like Tidal. And they use these things as they use the quality as their main selling point, but they don't really ever become mass market. They don't really ever get anywhere off the ground, really. The only reason Tidal has gotten anywhere is because it has had exclusives. Like, they've had exclusive album releases on there. Other than that, they were like when they were really only about the music quality, they got nowhere. The fact is, most people don't care. And most people don't need to care, because for most of these gains, there actually is no perceptible difference to most people. So while Apple could sell high bitrate songs and stuff, that would just be appealing to a very, very small market in what is already a declining market, which is the market of music sales.
So the second part of this about HEVC being part of 4K, yep, 100%. Like, 4K video is bigger. HEVC is a higher efficiency codec. It supports higher resolutions for video, not just the images with the HEIF thing. Anyway, yes, it's 100% part of that, and that's why we're going to see a 4K Apple TV and HEVC encoded content that plays on it.
I agree. Adam Sack writes in to say, and this is the first in theme that I noticed, which was try to get the ATP hosts to hate each other. So he writes in, if you had to use the daily tech setup of one of your co-hosts for a week instead of your own, whose devices would you choose? And I will start off, and I would probably choose Marco's because it is in general most similar to my setup. Obviously there are differences, but most similar to mine. And he has some pretty kick-ass headphones, so win-win.
Everyone would pick Marco's, including Marco, because he has the best stuff. Who's not going to pick Marco's setup? I don't want to use Casey's crappy laptop. Come on, no one wants to use my 10-year-old Mac Pro, man. So we pick Marco's.
Yeah, I would pick Casey's because non-retina. Sorry, John, you lose.
You should have picked my wife's. You got to pick the 5K iMac. It's the one without image retention.
Yeah, that's actually better than mine.
Oh, that's funny. Ian Murren writes in to say, and I don't think I selected this as one to answer, but I have a feeling I know who did. I have an 08 Accord. When's the ideal time to replace it? It's at about 80,000 miles, no maintenance issues to date. John, did you perhaps star this as a question to be answered?
I did, because I think this is a good, question. So the right time, probably the best time to replace this Accord was right now or last year, because the best time to get an Accord is at the tail end of a generation, when they've worked all the kinks out of it, and we always get like the special edition. Even if you don't get the special edition, like, they know how to build that generation of car. It has the most doodads and nice things added to it, and they figured out, and the first model is to put the USB port in the wrong place, or fiddle things. Like, that's the time to get it. The first car of the generation, the new Accord, I think the new Accord is uglier than the old one, but it does have a better infotainment system. So that's the other time you can get it. It's like the excitement of getting in on the first car in a new generation. But in general, when your Accord starts getting to be around 10 years old, I feel like that's the time to, if you want to have any chance of having any reasonable trade-in on it, or private sale, whatever you want to do with it, don't wait until the car is basically worthless, or it's worth like a couple $100. Wait till it's, it's still a couple $1,000s worth of value in your car. It's before crap starts breaking. Like you said, it's 80,000 miles. Nothing is issued with it. It's an 08, right? It's getting to be around 10 years. Time to replace.
Just as a point of comparison, I pretty much agree with you. But when we bought the Volvo, we traded in Aaron's 2007 Mazda 6, which had a little bit shy of 80,000 miles on it. And as I believe I talked about on the show, was pretty much a tank. Like, that thing almost never had any problems. And we got $3,000 in change for it. I think CarMax offered us $3,000. So it was not worthless by any means, but I agree with you, John, that this is the kind of edge of the cliff, I think, and you go too much further and you're going to fall right off that cliff. Marco, any thoughts on this?
Nope.
Good talk. Joe Sullivan writes in, is there anything that Syracuse is in favor of or likes without any caveats, reservations, or asterisks? And I have to congratulate Joe Sullivan, because there are about a million ways to ask this question like a big fat jerk, and this was not one of them. So well done.
That's a great question.
They put too many things at the end of this question. Caveats, reservations, or asterisks? Well, caveats, you kind of know what that means. Reservations, it's still getting a little bit vague. What do asterisks mean? Like, something else in addition that you want to say about it? Like, to answer your question, there's nothing so perfect. Come on. It's right in the slogan, right? Like, there are tons of things that I really like, but if pressed to say, hey, you really like Kiki's Delivery Service, is there anything wrong with that movie? Well, I mean, I pick that one because it's actually probably closest. Like, if pressed, I can come up with asterisks for Kiki's Delivery Service. Sure. Like, of course you can, right? Nothing is going to be absolutely perfect. If you literally can't think of anything wrong with it, then you probably don't understand the thing. But that doesn't mean that, like, these are my favorite things in the whole world. Like, overwhelmingly, everything I feel about these is that they're great, right? So I think that qualifies. And that reasonable definition of, is there anything that you are like without any caveats or reservation? Like, if someone said, hey, I need a good movie to watch. And I say, well, if you've never seen The Empire Strikes Back, watch Star Wars and then Empire Strikes Back. I'm not going to add reservations. Oh, but also, here are some reservations about The Empire Strikes Back. I'm going to add no reservations. There's nothing to say about it. So I would say that qualifies. The only definitions are the pedantic one, in which nothing qualifies for anybody, or the reasonable definition, in which there's tons of things that I really like. If you want to hear me, things I really like, listen to The Incomparable. Very, very often on that show, I talk about things I really like. From the video game journey to television shows, movies, books. We do talk about asterisks, if you want to call it that, but it doesn't mean we don't love them. So I think this question is not a good question. That's more than an asterisk, more than a reservation.
I think that was a great question because of the answer it got.
Yes,
Which
I'm so
spent
sorry,
most
Joe.
of the time complaining about the question.
I mean, but that's true of anybody. Like, is there anything, even if we ask you two, is there anything you two like uncritically without caveats, reservation, or asterisks? I think if you're honest with yourselves, you have to say that's not true for either of you either.
I mean, I think the chat room offered up a number of good options. Your kids, your wife, your dog, Long Island, Journey.
No, those are BS questions. You got reservations about your wife and your kids. Don't say you don't.
Ice cream. Is what
If you think your spouse does not have any asterisks, you are either newly married or willfully naive, because everybody has asterisks. Everybody.
Oh, I like where I am. What can I say?
Yeah, but there are always asterisks. What is asterisks? It's like the tiniest little thing, It's like, could something be a little bit different? Of course, always.
God.
I don't even know where to go from here.
Like, and especially kids, like, no, my child is perfect. Yes, lots of parents think that. Mm-hmm. Maybe a little bit less screaming, like not, like 3 seconds less screaming in a lifetime of screaming. Would you accept that? You say, yes, I would accept 3 seconds less screaming. Well, that's an asterisk. There you go. Maybe if that poo hadn't exploded out the side of the diaper that one time when I had a new car, would you? Oh, there's an asterisk. Oh, now you don't love your children because you didn't want the poo to come out the side of the diaper and go all over your new car seats.
Oh, that's amazing. All right, we got to move on, otherwise we're never going to get through this.
That's amazing.
Let's see. What was next? I have so many freaking tabs open. I must be John Syracuse. Edward Lovell writes in, what podcast do you currently listen to and would recommend? I listen to a ton of podcasts, but there's a couple that I would recommend. The aforementioned Due by Friday is excellent. I will pitch one of my, or a couple of my co-host shows. I think that Reconcilable Differences is phenomenal, and so is Under the Radar. But I will also pitch a couple others very quickly. If you wanted to hear a smart person talk about conservative politics, which you may or may not want, the Ben Shapiro show is very interesting and very good. I don't listen to every episode by any means. It's like 45 minutes, and it's pretty much every weekday. But when I have time, I'll usually about once a week, I'll catch it. And I typically deeply disagree with the things he thinks, but nevertheless, it is interesting. I will also say that Wheel Bearings is neutral by people who actually know what they're talking about.
Who would want to listen to that?
Yeah, I know, right? And then 20,000 Hertz is also very good. Think 99% Invisible, but specifically around sound. So those are just some selections from my extraordinarily long list of podcasts that I listen to. John, since I've been tagging Marco first more often, let's go to you next.
I have a strong recommendation for Roderick on the Line, which I love. The Flophouse, obviously, my probably oldest recommendation. That show is still going. Obviously, Hello Internet and Cortex, the pair of shows, both involving CGP Grey. Those are great. What else we got? I'm scrolling through Overcast to look at. I have way too many things in Overcast. I'm scrolling through there. Debug, which I don't know if it's still ongoing, but the back catalog of Debug is great. It's a tech show where they talk to lots of important people in tech. You should definitely check that out. And there's tons more, but I think that's a good place to get started.
Marco.
You guys have already mentioned pretty much everything I was going to say. The usuals, Due by Friday, Hello Internet, Cortex, Roderick on the Line. As far as in the tech world, again, you've covered many good ones. I would also add Upgrade on Relay FM with Jason Snell and Mike Curley. That is probably my favorite tech show. It's just really, really great. So yeah, otherwise, you guys pretty much covered it. Yeah, 99PI. And what I love about, I could obviously talk about podcasts forever, so I will try not to. But what I love about this is that none of us mentioned shows that were like the biggest podcast in the world. 99PI is probably the biggest one we mentioned. But when people think podcasting, they so often will make an assumption like everybody listens to This American Life, right? Stuff like that. But the fact is, there isn't any podcast out there that everybody listens to, and the world of mass market or very, very popular podcasts is still actually fairly diversified. And there's a lot of people who listen to a lot of podcasts who don't listen to any of those big ones. So it's just part of what I love about podcasting is like it's so incredibly diverse and specialized that like I can look at so many podcasts and there are so many amazing podcasts out there, but I don't need to spend any time listening to things that aren't like really interesting to me and that aren't specialized to my interests. Because there's so much that is. And that's just part of what I love about podcasting.
Yeah, and my Overcast list is huge. I subscribe to tons of things. I was trying to give recommendations that maybe people might not go for, like this one of the I didn't recommend the talk show because I assume that show exists and it's good and you should totally listen to it. Like I didn't recommend This American Life because I assume that show exists and it's good and you should listen to it. Right, trying to find the slightly more obscure corners, but that's the other thing I like about podcasts. I subscribe to way more podcasts than I faithfully listen to. Like I'm not a podcast completionist. I have tons of subscriptions. A few shows I keep up with very religiously, but a lot of shows I let age and then go through 5 episodes at a time, and a lot of shows I just pick and choose from. That's the best thing. Not only do you not have to there's only 5 podcasts that everyone listens to. You should find a podcast that you really like, and sometimes you find a podcast and you only have to listen to the episodes that you really like. Like even like The Incomparable. Like if they do an episode reviewing something you don't care about, skip that episode. Like they're standalone. If they're they do a thing about a TV show that you didn't watch and you're not interested in, fine. Like just pick and choose. Like it's the beauty of podcasting. But you should listen to every episode of our show, obviously.
Oh, yeah, obviously.
Of course. I mean, how could you not? Regular Language writes in, what do you think about the current state of Swift? I would like to hear what John and Marco have to say about I guess, Casey, a rant about Swift opens. Oh, I think there's new lines missing here. Basically, what do you guys think? And maybe me talk about Swift open source. So I will, I guess, round this out at the end. So let's start with Marco and then go to John.
Honestly, I don't pay that much attention to what's going on in Swift. I know I'm supposed to. I know I should. Overcast contains some Swift code that I added, to try to cheap stuff the language and stuff. But I'm still writing most code in Objective-C, and it's not really out of a judgment of Swift so much as it's just a pragmatism that I still don't see a lot of motivation for me to switch. I recognize that I should, but I, in practice, don't.
John?
This is too open-ended a question. I would have never have picked it. Swift seems like it's chugging along. I do keep up with the things that are going on in it. It's still got, challenges, but it's making slow, steady progress. So I think Swift is moving in the right direction at varying speeds. And what do we have to say about C?
No. That's not C, the language. I think basically the question was, what do you guys have to say about Swift, and what do I have to say specifically about Swift open source? So,
all right, well, go ahead.
Yeah, I think your summary of Swift is good and brief, and I stand by it. Swift open source is a double-edged sword. I think that the problem that I have with Swift open source is that it seems like a lot of the really, really, really academic, I'm trying to think of a way to say this without being pejorative, but people who are much more interested in the academic side of programming languages seem to be the ones that are most vocal and most interested to participate on the mailing lists and things of that nature. Whereas someone like myself, which is not to say I'm at the same caliber as a super academic, but someone like myself who I like to think of as I'm a reasonably smart guy, but I don't really have any interest in following the intricacies of what's going on in the mailing list. I don't really have any interest in arguing about, different pitches that have been made via the mailing list. I just want to get crap done, man. And to me, I feel like Swift open source, it feels like, from an outsider's point of view, that maybe it could use a little more stern direction from Apple to prevent the kind of meandering and the kind of, language features that I find to be really, really silly and not terribly helpful for actually just shipping products. And that's where I kind of get a little frustrated, but that's easy. It's easy for me to throw stones from outside the glass house, right? And really, if I wanted to affect change, what I should be doing is participating on the darn mailing list that I'm lamenting.
I'm not sure you should be doing that, because I'm going to put this out there. Language design is a different skill than being a programmer and using that language. And so I think it is entirely appropriate that the list where people are designing the languages looks weird to someone who's I just want to write my programs. You make the language and give it to me. They don't need to cross over. I think Swift Evolution, I've seen a lot of language design mailing lists, and Swift Evolution is above average, believe it or not. And maybe if you look on the outside, this is the first time you follow the development of any language, it can look dominated by academics and weird and chaotic and a lot of bike shedding. But in the grand scheme of things, they are above average. And, just coming so early to say, look, we're going to have releases, we're going to exclude things from them. And then, there's going to be people discussing things in the list, even though they say they're excluded from Swift 3 or Swift 4. But in general, I think they're pretty well behaved. And I do want essentially language nerds or people with the skill, the language design skill and, RPG parlance or whatever. to be designing the language, rather than having a bunch of people who just want to use the language throwing out the first idea that pops into their head that they think might make their like beginning language designers. Like, I've been programming for 20 years, and I think a language would be cool if you did. Well, how many languages have you designed? Have you tried doing that? What does it actually turn out to be? So I like language design as a separate skill being developed among people who just do that, and seeing them do their thing definitely does look weird, but I endorse it.
I also, and part of why I have not adopted Swift more is that the idea of investing my time into a language that is still very much a beta is a huge turnoff for me. Like, I have no interest in participating in the design of this language. I have no interest in beta testing this language for anybody. In the same way, like, I don't want to beta test brakes on my car. You know, like, I want to get the final brakes, thank you, and I want them to work, and I don't want to ever have to think about them, or I never want them to flake out or fail or cause me undue work.
It doesn't sound like a Tesla owner. You don't want to beta test the brakes. They just sent us new firmware for your brakes last night while you were sleeping.
Like, for me, like, especially like every summer during beta season, when like all the new stuff comes out, and I see all the iOS developers I know complaining about something that Swift broke, I am very happy to not be very reliant on it right now. And, you know, because the fact is, like, I'm an independent developer. I don't have a lot of time. And the time I have to spend coding, I have to spend it very wisely. And the most frustrating thing for me, which is true of many people, is fighting with my tools. And so any language or part of my developer tool chain, I'm going to try to minimize reasons that I would have to fight with it, or the amount of work it's going to require from me to use. And Swift, while it does look like a fairly, I'm sure it will be good once it's done. For me, right now, the reality of using Swift is still a lot of overhead and a lot of dealing with the changes as they come and dealing with weird things breaking sometimes. And I just want to wait till it's all settled before I invest heavily into it, because I have zero interest in being an early adopter for things like this. All I want is for it to work so I can spend my time in other ways.
You know, I will say that there are certainly annoyances, and I can't legitimately argue with anything that you've said, but it feels like it's gotten a lot better over the last, 6 to 12 months. And,
it has.
And the dabbling I've done on the Xcode 9 beta, by and large, I mean, it's a beta, of course, but by and large, it looks really solid. And so I think... And of course, you would say this every year, right? Now is the time to dive in, Marco. It's all better than it ever was. And, it's the year of Linux on the desktop, right? It'll always be better the next year. But it is not nearly as scary now as it once was. But there's still dragons back there from time to time.
And I would also love to use Swift on the server. Like, that's one thing that has me very interested in learning it, because, like, the idea of learning one language that I can use in both places is incredibly attractive to me. Like that, because that would be a great use of, if I'm going to learn more languages and master more frameworks, being able to use the same one in both places basically makes it twice as valuable to me. So I would love that. But it's all just so early. And to have basics like concurrency not worked out yet is like, I need...
Well, yes and no, right? Like, it's just as worked out as it is in Objective-C, because you still have GCD and whatnot. It's just that...
Well, when I'm saying server, I mean Linux, though.
Well, okay, fair. But my point is just that, like, concurrency, I agree with you, should be worked out in a much better way, but it's not like we're handcuffed now. It's just that it's the existing GCD API, again, maybe not on the server, but at least on the client, it's the existing GCD API, and it actually is a lot nicer in a lot of ways, but there should be something like, everyone is calling for C# async await, so we'll see what happens.
We are sponsored this week by Squarespace. Start building your website today at squarespace.com and enter code ATP at checkout to get 10% off. Squarespace sites are so easy to use, it's kind of a wonder why anybody does anything else. And it's kind of a one-way door. Once you discover Squarespace, once you finally, after hearing all these podcast ads, decide to finally try it out, most people don't go back to the old ways, because the old ways of hosting websites are cumbersome and just really manual and tedious. You have to do things like install software updates and worry about your site getting hacked and your server going down and all these things you don't have to worry about with Squarespace. And the best thing about Squarespace, for nerds like us, a lot of times, if you're the nerd in your family, Oh, and people need a website. They will ask you to make it for them. And that's one thing you do not want. You don't want to be in that business because Squarespace is so good at it. You can just tell them, here, go to Squarespace. If they won't do it, set it up for them. Go to squarespace.com, use code ATP for 10% off your first purchase, and set it up for them. You can hand it off to them and say, here you go. You can now help yourself. They can do updates themselves. They can customize the design themselves. And if they need any help, they go to Squarespace for support, not you. It's all included. It's wonderful support. You can host all kinds of sites on Squarespace. Blogs, portfolios, even stores, podcasts, stuff that's a little hard to host in regular ways, but Squarespace has it all built in. It can do so much. So check it out today. Go to squarespace.com. Whether it's a site for you or a site that someone's asking you to make for them, get yourself out of the website hosting business and let Squarespace do it because it's easier, the result is better, and then you don't have to do it and you are free. Check it out today at squarespace.com. Make sure to use offer code ATP to get 10% off your first purchase. Squarespace, make your next move.
David Klein writes, about 2 years ago, you discussed women in tech and podcasting and even exchanged hosts. How do you feel today regarding women in tech? This is a very good question, which stresses me out because I feel like I'm going to step on some landmine here. But that being said, I feel like we have made, not the three of us, like we as a community have made a fair bit of positive strides, but still have a almost equal amount of improvement left to make. And I feel like people are paying a lot more attention to the fact that there's so much sexism in tech and it's such a crummy place to be a woman. And I think the easiest example of this is people, like regular people, knowing what a cesspool Uber is/was, and regular people deciding to use Lyft instead of Uber, which, quick aside, I used Lyft in Chicago when Aaron and I were on our 10-year wedding anniversary, and it was great. Worked great. No different than Uber. And so I highly recommend it. But anyway, so we still have a ton of room. Like, it's one of those things where we have taken like the tiniest, littlest step forward, but there's still like 85,000 miles in front of us. So it's almost imperceptible. Marco.
I basically agree. I mean, I unfortunately am not an expert in this topic. Few men in tech are. That's not a coincidence. It's a huge problem, and we still have so long to go. But we are talking about it now way more than it used to be talked about. So even though I don't have the knowledge to know whether it's actually making progress, really, I have no idea. I would guess it's making slow progress. But we are talking about it, and a lot more people, ourselves included, are much more conscientious of this being an issue than we used to be. And that has to help too. And there's obviously a lot more that we can all do and that we need to all do. But I do think that awareness is way better than it was. And that will slowly start helping this problem.
Yeah, that's like the first stage of all these things is the very long process of getting people to be aware that this is an issue at all. What's the issue? What is the problem? Is this a thing that exists? And that takes a really long time. It's kind of depressing to me because my childhood, like I felt like one of the previous names of a larger version of this is the women's lib movement back in the 60s and 70s and even into the 80s was also in that stage of like, hey, raise awareness, like women's liberation. What do women need to be liberated from? What do you mean, right? I felt like we went through that, and then like that knowledge was lost somehow. And now here we are back in the tech sector, which is a microcosm of the larger world. It's like, do we have to relearn that sexism exists? Apparently the answer is yes. And we're learning it better and more thoroughly and with, I think, a clearer-eyed picture and not accepting as many limitations as the previous, feminist movements and women's liberation and all that other stuff. But I still very strongly feel that we are in the awareness phase for everybody. Like for me as well, right? And I do see some concrete signs of progress. I find myself seeing, from my perspective, a lot of what I see is like, who's speaking at this tech conference? I see and watch and hear about and get forwarded to me more really good talks by women at tech conferences, this is the circles I travel in my Twitter or whatever, than I did several years ago. And I feel like that is progress, probably just progress in my awareness that that is a thing, and also progress in the people I follow forwarding me those things. And, you know, like you said, like the fact that there can even be a story that has any real world consequences to a company about, hey, this company's run by a bunch of sexist jerks, and that actually like is a thing we hear about, and B, something, anything, literally anything happens about it. Maybe not the right thing, maybe not the best things, but something happens. Like if one extra person deletes their app, like that is a tiny bit of progress. But yeah, that's pretty much how I feel how it's going. And about us specifically on the show, like we still talk about it, we still discuss it, we still try to do what we can in the ways that we can. And, you know, it's a continuing struggle.
Yep. Robin Christofferson writes in, which, if any, of the many rumored changes to the new iPhone would actually make you decide not to upgrade if it comes to pass? I'm going to go on a very small rant about this. I don't understand people who say, and I can't think of a specific example of, actually the touch bar is a great example. I will never like the touch bar and I will never buy a Mac that has a touch bar. That to me just doesn't make sense, because it stands to reason that at least for portable Macs, the touch bar is going to be the future, probably across the line. It may not be for 5 years or something like that, but it will probably be the future. And even if the touch bar, if you think that's a crummy example, it doesn't matter. My point is, like, just get on the bus. The bus is pulling away, get on the bus. And you may not love it, but get on the bus. Because what's the alternative? Go to Windows? Have fun. And and so to me, there may be something that I don't like about the new iPhones. So for the sake of example, I'm skeptical that I would terribly enjoy the face unlock. And I suspect I would miss Touch ID. But I mean, I will certainly give it a shot. And if it ends up that I like Touch ID better, well, then that's a stinky part of the new iPhone, but everything else will be amazing, so it'll all even itself out. So I don't really, I understand the question, but I don't really understand this question.
You think the narrower view they're asking would make you not want to upgrade? And when I saw this question, I thought about like Touch ID on the back. If they can't get the Touch ID under the screen for this generation, but we know for a fact, because other phones do this, that fingerprint sensing under a screen is a technology that exists. It just, wasn't up to Apple's caliber yet for whatever reason. I might say, if it was my upgrade year, which it isn't, by the way, I might say, I'm not going to upgrade to this phone. I'll wait till next year when hopefully they'll have that sorted out, or we even wait to the next generation, because I have no problem waiting. It's not like Casey was saying, like, I'm never going to buy with a touch bar. Like, obviously, eventually, you're going to have to get a new phone, and eventually I would choose to get an iPhone. But specifically, like, if they make a new form factor and it's the first model year and they had to make weird compromises and Touch ID is in the back, even if it's just as simple as, like, they put Touch ID in the back, but I've never used Touch ID in the back, I'm not sure I like it, I'd rather let a bunch of my friends who I know really well buy this phone and tell me about it, so that the next year I'll know whether I think I'll like it, or, like, just play with it in the store or whatever. So, yes, there are lots of weird things involving the phone that would make me decide not to upgrade. But I don't think there's many things that would make me decide I'm never going to buy an iPhone again. And that's a different question.
Yeah, I mean, I think pretty similarly. I mean, look, we all know I'm going to buy it regardless. So why even bother? I mean, I think the answer is, I'm going to do what I always do, which is I'm going to buy the new thing immediately, and then I'll complain about anything that's worse about it.
Fair enough. That's typically how these things tend to go. I did not want to answer this question because this is another example of where I don't care. But somebody, and I think that person's name might be John Siracusa, has decided we should answer this question. So Steven Sandhoff writes, tabs or spaces? I honestly don't even have the faintest idea what my editor is set to. It's whatever the default for Xcode is. Don't care.
You're a monster. You don't even know.
Don't even know.
Just pick one.
Actually, I can say the same thing. So I know what it is in TextMate, but for my iOS code and Xcode, I actually have no idea which one it is. But I will say in TextMate it's spaces. But this is the kind of, like, I tweeted about this a few weeks ago. Like, it doesn't really matter because good tools let you switch between one or the other with like one command. So it really doesn't matter at all.
No. That's not something a tab user would say. It totally matters. Let me tell you why. So first of all, my answer on tabs versus spaces is spaces. And the reason I say spaces is because spaces are the same size visually everywhere.
But the whole point in tabs, I thought, is that I can choose to have my tabs be 1,000
Right,
width.
okay, yeah. So now tabs, now it's like, okay, well, tabs are semantic. Indent here,
exactly.
But don't tell me how big it has to be. The problem with that is that I think good formatting in in some programming languages, good formatting needs to be done, has instances in which you want to indent by less than one indentation level to align things, right? And if you use spaces everywhere, there is no ambiguity, and you can make it look like how you want it to look like. If you use tabs, some joker is going to set their tab to 2, and someone else is going to have it set to 4, and someone's going to have it set to 8, and the line where you use tabs but then use spaces to align a bunch of things is going to look crazy pants. So spaces is the correct answer, but I'm forced to use tabs at work and have for many years. And so if you're a working programmer, you got to do what you got to do with the actual answer is spaces. And Chris Lattner agrees with me, so there you go.
And that's all that really matters.
I bet that's going to be what eventually drives you to quit your job. Like eventually, one day, you're going to hit that tab key for the last time, and you're like, "That's it, I'm done."
No, I mean you still hit the tab key even when it does spaces. But like work changed both my brace style and the indenting character. But this is what it means to be a working programmer.
It's too far.
Wait, what is your preferred brace style?
Many years ago, I used BSD style, opening and closing in the same column.
Mm-hmm.
For basically my entire career up to like maybe 10 years ago, and then I forcibly switched to KNR. No cuddled elses. Come on, people.
I'm a KNR person myself.
You know, first of all, I had no idea those were the two. Like, I didn't know the names for those two styles, but I used to be violently, devoutly in favor of, what did you say, BSD, where all of the opening and
maybe
closing...
I'm getting it wrong. It might be Allman. It's the one where the opening curly is underneath the I and if.
Right. That's the way I used to be. And I was passionately about it, like almost as bad as I am about people who say GIF. Like, I passionately believed that you have to put it under I, and those monsters that say GIF that also put the opening brace at the end of the line are just without help. And over time, similar story, I think because I started writing a fair bit of JavaScript, I ended up kind of switching to the other style where you have, if something, open brace, new line.
I think it's an important part in every programmer who doesn't work for themselves in a single person shop in their careers is becoming not just multi-language fluent, but becoming able to, and if you work on open source projects, you're forced to do this too, becoming able to write code in the style demanded by the thing that you're doing, whether it's a job or an open source project or whatever. You can be precious about it and have a preferred thing, but you have to be able to get the job done in whatever language or formatting that is dictated by the because you just have to. It's just practically, and in the end, like I was also pretty strongly about opening curly under the little I, and I still think it's the style that makes more sense. But you get over it a few years of using KNR, and you're like, okay, like it's fine. And it's actually difficult if you get into a groove to switch back and forth. Like you have to mode switch between them. Your fingers you'll find them doing the thing that they do, and you have to switch back. But like that's life. That's programming for you.
I mean, actually, the reason why I use KNR style is that I used to use the brace under the eye, but like in college and like as I was teaching myself how to program and going through college, like I used that style. And then my first job used strictly KNR style, and they just like broke me of that habit, and then that became my style. Anyway, we can all agree, tabs versus spaces. It doesn't really matter, but the right answer is spaces, unless you use two spaces, in which case you're an animal.
I think I could probably get behind that. Spencer Holbrook writes in, what low-level part of Apple's stack would you like to see replaced next? HFS Plus to APFS, Objective-C to Swift, OpenGL to Metal, etc. I think I'm most anxious and most interested in HFS Plus to APFS, and I can't think of another example off the top of my head. I'm sure, John, you'll probably have one. But none of these are really rev my engine that much. Sorry, John. Marco,
they're asking you what you want to see replaced next. They listed a bunch of ones they're already doing.
Oh, so following all of that?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, wish list.
I don't even know. I'd have to think about that. I'm not sure, to be honest. I'll pass on this one. Marco, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm sure John's going to have the best answers here, but
exactly.
Thank you for going to me first, so I don't have to follow him. But my boring answers are basically, I have two. It's like, if the API framework, or if the UI framework is the correct level for this question, I would love to see what surpasses AppKit on the Mac, if ever.
Oh, that's a good one, actually. That's very good.
That's not low level.
So if you go a little bit lower level, what I would also like to see is another thing on the Mac, actually. I would like to see Mac sandboxing completely rethought and matured, and a rethinking of the Mac security model with the new... So like basically bringing a more iOS-like sandboxing environment to the Mac. So to do things like you could knowingly, safely install an application and then delete that application and know that everything that goes with it gets deleted. Know that it can only write to and read from certain directories that are easy to manage and isolated from other things, and can't, like, every app that you install as you, the user account, can't read your entire user directory. And they started down this path with sandboxing, whenever that was, like 8 years ago. And they did, like, the most bare bones basic version and then just stopped, and they never matured it. And and because of the version they did and the various shortcomings it had, it basically made it so that most apps could not be reasonably sandboxed if they did anything cool at all. And I bet there's a better balance to be struck now in the modern day with what we know, with where the software world is, where the economics and where the ecosystem has gone since then. I would love to see a more modern, more secure version of sandboxing on the Mac that brings it closer to iOS in those security and user assuredness ways, but that still has the power of Mac software available in various new clever ways. I know that's a very hard thing to solve, but there's also A, I think we need to solve it, and B, I think there's massive gains to be had there when it is solved.
All right, John.
So there's probably there's a bunch of stuff all the way down to the kernel itself that I could list here, but the reason I put this in was because I don't have any really good answers for low-level stuff that I'm dying for, except for one. And it's actually mentioned in here. They said, HFS to APFS, Objective-C to Swift, OpenGL to Metal. The OpenGL to Metal one is the one I actually have objections to. I understand Metal, and it's a good thing to have, and Apple is heavily behind it, but I think Apple should still have a world-class OpenGL implementation. And I know that's a tough sell, but it's like, what do we even need that for? We're all in on Metal. Metal is the future, blah, blah, blah. I don't not think you should get rid of Metal, but OpenGL or Vulkan or whatever is still a thing, and it is still worth Apple not just maintaining, but advance it. Either don't have it at all. It's kind of like Flash. Like, look, if you think it's viable to have a web browser without Flash, don't support it at all. Don't just say, our Flash implementation is slow and so people won't use it and they'll migrate to H. Just don't support it at all. Either don't support it at all, and if you think you can't, we can't drop OpenGL, we have to have it, our whole OS runs. Well, then make a good version of it. This came up recently in the article I think Casey read, he retweeted it, but I read it earlier about the Dolphin GameCube emulator and all interesting technical problems. Casey, you can have a show note there. Put that one link in the show notes. It's a good article. Lots of good articles on that. And it goes through some fun technical details. And then towards the bottom of this really nice article, it says, and here's a section for Mac users. None of this is relevant to you because your OpenGL stack is a piece of crap, and none of the features that we even talked about even exist in your OpenGL implementation, let alone exist in our performance. So screw you guys. And it's like, look, Apple, it's embarrassing. I want them, and what do we lose by that? We don't get to have a cool GameCube emulator unless we boot into Windows or Linux, for crying out loud. Linux! So I hope that Apple gets their act together with OpenGL. Either don't support it at all and then figure out what you have to do to make your computer still viable, or actually support it and be awesome.
That was not what I expected, but that was a pretty good answer.
We are sponsored this week by Betterment. Investing made better. Go to betterment.com/ATP to learn more. Betterment is a smarter way to invest your money, providing investing advice through smart technology, automated investing, and human advisors. They have changed the industry by using the same strategies that financial advisors use with clients who have millions of dollars, but making them available to everyone, including smart rebalancing, global diversification, tax-efficient strategies, and more. Betterment's mission is to help you manage and grow your investments to build your financial future, all with low fees, so you lose less of your money along the way. Because if you do the math, Typical investment fees and costs really add up over time, and Betterment's fees are a fraction of the cost of other financial services. And Betterment is so easy to use that they've won awards for their customer experience. You can see for yourself with a demo account right on their site if you want. ATP listeners get up to 1 year managed for free. For more information, visit betterment.com/ATP. Once again, up to 1 year managed free. Terms and conditions do apply, and investing involves risk. To learn more, visit betterment.com/ATP. That's betterment.com/ATP. Betterment. Investing made better.
JC Calhoun writes, how about an update on how the Overcast advertising is working out? So, John, no, I'm just kidding. What do you think, Marco?
I mean, the short answer is it's great. I mean, there's not a whole lot to say on it. So they're talking about like how I switched a few months ago to selling my own direct ads, and now they're entirely for podcasts. At first it was like for podcasts and or websites. The podcasts have been buying them so much that I actually recently stopped selling them for anything that's not a podcast. The capability is still there if I choose to use it later, but I don't think I will need to for a while. I worked out some various like pricing and inventory level tweaks over the last few months, just working out like how should these things be priced, how many should I have in each category, what should the categories even be. But I think it's pretty stable now. It's making good money. It's making something like 10 times what I was making from Google ad, whatever, their AdMob, that's what it is, yeah, the mobile ad thing. So it's going great, and I, as long as this continues to sell at all reasonably, I don't see myself changing the model anytime soon.
From your analytics or whatever you've got running against these ads, does it seem like they're working? Like, obviously they're working in the sense that you keep selling them, but are they working in the sense that it seems like they're pushing subscriptions to shows and all that?
Yeah, I mean, I have that info, and I share that. Like, the advertisers, when you buy an ad, they see in their little control panel on the website how many impressions, how many taps, and how many subscriptions it has gotten. They don't see anything else, but they see those three numbers, and that's all. Honestly, I don't collect anything else. That's all I collect. So that plays into how I price them. Like, I try to keep the cost per new subscriber within a certain range. The challenge in pricing these ads is not trying to get people to buy them. It's trying to avoid the temptation to raise prices like crazy because they're selling out frequently. And it's hard for me to know, like, what should a new listener be worth? Like, what range should I keep this price in? The way I've been pricing it, I've been keeping it between $1 and $2 for most categories. But certain categories, like I recently separated out business podcasts into their own category. Because, like, it, you know, I ran the numbers of like what is a listener to what's a listener to ATP worth, and if you run the numbers over the course of certain time spans or like a year or two, it ends up being like $5, something like that, right? And so I thought if I keep the prices between $1 and $2, that keeps it pretty good, pretty compelling for most people. But certain categories like business podcasts are huge. First of all, like that's a huge market for like business, tips and tricks and writing books and everything. And many of them monetize not just by ads, but by selling you books, ebooks, conferences, seminars, stuff like that. So they might have a very different valuation of what a new subscriber is worth to them. And so, and this is true of many of the different categories of podcasts. And some of them, the people don't care what a new listener's worth to them. They just want to get some listeners, and then they have a new show maybe, and they want to get it basically going from zero, and so they use the ads for that. If you look at it purely as like how should I price these, in terms of like pure demand, they keep selling out, so I should price them way higher. But if I price them higher, we're going to start getting into numbers that if you think about the numbers, if you run the numbers of like what is a listener worth, it starts not to make sense for a lot of people. So I don't want to reach that level. So basically the answer is I think I even could make more money from it if I tried to, but I would be afraid if I did that I would have like a brief period of making more money followed by a crash as a lot of advertisers started seeing, this actually isn't worth what I'm paying for these users and starts bailing out. So I want to keep it reasonable so that I have the most advertisers as possible. But, besides that minor concern, which I think is largely alleviated now by just time and stability, it's going great. It really is going great. And it's one of the only advertising things I've ever seen where basically all the parties win. Because I'm not showing you ads for Viagra mattresses. Like, I'm showing you ads for podcasts in categories that you subscribe to while you're using a podcast app in a way that respects your privacy, that isn't a huge burden, that doesn't get in your way. That, like, it's a great setup. And, this obviously is not a method that every app can do. So it's not like I'm not saying like every app should monetize the way I've monetized, because, well, you simply can't. It doesn't apply. But for what I am doing, it's working great. And I have more advertisers who want to buy ads than I have inventory to sell them. And that's wonderful.
That's really awesome. John, any additional thoughts on that?
Nope.
All right. Edgar Perez writes in, and this is the first one that I noticed in this context, but I've seen this come up a lot, particularly after our 1Password discussion. And he writes to say, I agree that $3 a month for an app service is reasonable, but what if all the apps I use monthly want $3 a month? Can't let apps kill the Mac. I understand what people are driving at. And again, Edgar isn't the first person to say this. If every app I use is a subscription app, well, suddenly I won't be able to afford anything anymore. And I get that, but I think in my eyes, if everything I used became a subscription, I would either change my usage or I would pay for it all. And since we're now deep into the second episode, I don't remember if it was this episode or last week, we talked about ad blockers. I think it was last week, which was really 2 hours ago, talked about ad blockers and how, Marco, you were saying, well, if an ad blocker shows up, then I'll just leave and I just won't read that content.
It was this one, by the way.
Oh, was it this one? Okay, yep. Thanks. So, I'm getting tired. It's nearly midnight. But anyway, so point being, I think it's a similar thing. So like for me, and this is just for Casey, it may not be for others, but for me, I absolutely will pay for 1Password and I will absolutely pay for day one. But maybe you're, the listener here, maybe you're a day one user, but you don't love it. You just kind of like it. And maybe it's not worth paying for on a regular basis. So you just stop using day one and use Apple Notes or something like that. That's okay. That's an option. Like that will work and life will go on. But I don't know. That's just the way I look at it. John, what do you think?
If you had remembered back to actual last week, I addressed this on the 1Password episode. I said, look, I did it from the perspective of an app developer. Not every app can sustain subscription pricing. Your app has to be valuable enough to enough people to sustain subscription pricing. So I don't think there's any fear that every single app is going to be, $3 a month, because there are app categories, entire categories, let alone individual apps, that can't sustain that because they don't deliver that much value to people. So you have to know your application and your market to say, are enough people willing to subscribe to this? People probably aren't going to pay $3 a month for a fart app, right? Even if you have new farts released every month, like they're a whole, you'd have to turn it into like a free to play, casino gambling, exploit human nature type service to get that, and then it's a different kind of app entirely, right? So this is a fear that I don't think is a real thing. If you're a customer, this will take care of itself. Don't like the price, don't buy it, right? And from a developer's perspective, if you don't want to be on the losing end of that problem taking care of itself, you should know, if we can't develop this without subscription pricing, make sure that it is valuable enough to enough people to justify subscription pricing. And 1Password certainly is, because a lot of people find it a very valuable thing and they want it to work on an ongoing basis, and they understand the ongoing maintenance costs and they're willing to pay for it. But your fart app might not be. So I would say don't worry about this too much. And if you don't want to pay for a subscription, don't pay for it.
I mean, every time subscription pricing comes up, people bring up this issue of what's going to happen when everything's subscription and everyone gets tired of it and stops paying for it, something like that. The idea of subscription fatigue. And, we've been able to charge subscription prices now for a little while, and that's just not happening. Like, I have not seen any sign that that's happening. I think this is one of those things that the market just sorts out itself. Like John said, like most apps aren't willing to, most customers aren't willing to pay for most of their apps. But they wouldn't be buying a $36 a year upgrade either, instead of paying $3 a month. Like, the fact is, most apps have a lot of competition and aren't that necessary for most people. So they're going to have a hard time no matter how they charge. But the apps that are really valuable to people, that are difficult for people to go without, or that are required for them to do their work or whatever else, or that appeal to markets that don't care about spending $3 a month, they can do this just fine. I don't think the whole like slippery slope argument of like, well, once all the apps go this way, no one's going to want to pay anymore. I just don't think that's happening. Like, I think we would have seen that by now. We would have seen that at least starting, and it's just not. Most apps are not even trying to charge subscription rates, and the ones that are mostly do okay.
Yeah, I agree. Jude Dunn writes in, is it technically possible for Apple to make second-gen AirPods noise canceling or noise isolating? I really, really want that. I don't see why not. I think the problem with that is it's even more processing to be done, thus even more battery usage. But I mean, at this point, I don't know that it would be a tremendous difference. And certainly noise isolating. I mean, they could change the look of what of these things and change where they sit within your ear. But I don't see any reason why it wouldn't work. Marco?
Yeah, I mean, you basically got it. I mean, the noise cancellation requires a microphone on the outside and then DSP on the inside to basically emit sound waves on the inside, but mixed into your sound that will cancel out by phase of the wave, that will cancel out the waves of the ones coming in from the outside world. So there's nothing stopping them from doing that, as far as I know, in the hardware they have now, or in that style of hardware they have now, rather. But that wouldn't be very useful without better isolation, and isolation is right now where they really fall down. And that doesn't require any circuitry. That requires physical barriers, basically, of literally just isolating you from the world around you. And to do that, right now they are earbuds, and what earbuds are little drivers that sit kind of inside your ears, but they're more like resting in a little curvy spot in your ear. They're not really blocking your ear canal at all. There are other types like canal phones or in-ear monitors. They're also called that actually block your whole ear canal with some kind of like big like rubber cone thing or something like that, and they physically block the sound from getting into your ears. Larger over-ear headphones have a similar effect, but they cup over your ears as if you're putting your hands over your ears and block the sound that way. Either way, you're physically blocking the sound from getting there. For the AirPods or earpods to do that, they would have to have a totally different shape that would actually like block your ear canal and be more like canal phones. Or they would have to have some kind of like, coating or cover you could put on them, some kind of accessory that you could put on them to do that. Although I think they would be designed for this from the start. So that there's nothing stopping Apple from releasing AirPod canal phones. But it's a different style of product. It's a whole different shape. It's a whole different set of constraints and design goals you'd have to have for it. I don't expect they would do that probably at all. But if they do it, it would probably be a separate product. It probably would not just be like AirPods 2. Now they block your whole ear canal. It would probably be like, here's the new, Air Canals or whatever. They would have a better name than that, but it would probably be a separate product because that's a very separate physical design of these products.
Let's just work on Apple being able to ship AirPods in a reasonable time frame before we worry about adding features.
Sick burn.
Yeah, and I also would not spend too much time waiting around for the AirPod 2s, AirPods 2, whatever they call it. I don't think Apple is updating the AirPods anytime soon.
Yeah, I think you're probably right about that. Alex S. Glomsas writes in to say, if you could make a single change to Swift, what would it be? I will say that even though it's probably not the biggest thing in the world, what I'd really love to see is reflection. And I've talked about this from time to time. Reflection or introspection means at runtime, you can look at an object in code and say, what are the properties it has? What are the methods it has? And typically along with that, you'll see annotations, which are attributes in C# world, which means you can kind of decorate your code with metadata, which is also super useful. I could go on and on and on about this, but it's not terribly interesting. So I'll just say reflection with a bonus choice of stealing Marco's thought earlier of a better concurrency model. So since I've stolen your obvious answer, Marco, what would you say afterwards?
Honestly, I don't really have a good answer to this question because I don't know enough about Swift because of the aforementioned factors. I don't use it really enough. So I really am not qualified to say.
John?
So if a single change, if concurrency counts as a single change, just solve concurrency. The solution of your choosing, either a good implementation of async await or something entirely different or whatever, that would be my single thing, but that's kind of vague. If I have to be narrow, I would say regular expression literals. But
No way.
Both of those things are coming, by the way. It's just a question of when.
Brian Middleton asks, what arcade games are each of you nostalgic for from your childhood? Is there one game you would like to own? I will start as usual. We actually have a pinball machine in the house. My dad, many years ago, had gone through a phase of repairing old pinball machines. And so he had like 6 of them at one point, but unloaded all but 2 of them, one of which went to me and one of which he still has. So I obviously have nostalgia for all those, but in terms of like traditional arcade games, NBA Jam, Cruisin' USA, and Street Fighter 2, I didn't play any of them that much, but I enjoyed deeply all 3 of those, both in arcade form and occasionally in console form. So I would say those 3. Marco.
Honestly, I hardly went to arcades in my childhood. We didn't really live that close to them, and we didn't have a lot of money. And so, the idea of just going there and like blowing like tens of dollars, maybe like that would not really happen in my family. But when I did play a little bit of arcade games as I was like a teenager here and there, the one I most liked was Daytona USA. This was during the mid 90s or so like the Sega Saturn was coming out, and so they had like a few cool games like Virtua Fighter and everything that were coming out with alongside of it. And Daytona USA was my favorite one. It was a racing game, and it was just basic kind of like NASCAR style. I think I don't know if about racing to say, but whatever style uses what appear to be stock cars on a round track without a lot of turns. So that. And it was a lot of fun, but it was $1 per play in most arcades. So I hardly ever played it, with the exception of there was this like, I was in some kind of youth group, and there was one time that they had a lock-in at a Magic Mountain arcade where we just got everything set to free play, and we got to play them all night. So I played a lot of Daytona USA for one night, and that was awesome. But nice. Other than that, this is kind of a sad story. Like, other than that, I hardly ever played arcade games, so I don't really know.
John.
I played a lot of arcade games. I was a lot that I'm very nostalgic for. It's hard to pick one that I would want to own, though, because in general, arcade games back then, and I'm assuming still today, were made to take your money. And so I remember getting lots of tokens or quarters and feeding them into these machines. And I think if I owned any of them, they would become shallow very fast, especially the games I'm nostalgic about, unless you do something like Centipede or like Pac-Man, or you try to make it like the perfect game or whatever. But in a couple of summer camps I went to, they had arcade games that were either set to free or were only 25 cents when instead of 50 or whatever, and that I played a lot. And so there are some games I got really good at. Like one of them, it was Tiger Heli, which is not a top-down vertically scrolling shooter thing, or 1942, similar type of game. Both of those were at camp. I got really good at those games. Like that was where you'd put in one quarter and I'd play it for a really, really, really long time. But even then you feel like, oh, well, now I've seen the whole game. Like this is all there is to this game. And so I really wouldn't want to own it. So I don't think I would want to own any of these machines, but most nostalgic for, the Star Wars sit-down game, Afterburner, which was impressive when it first came out, especially with the one that you move around inside the thing. It was one of the first 50-cent games I can remember. The classics, Centipede, Galaga. I like Time Pilot. There's a weird one called Section Z. Sidearm. This was a totally weird one that I still think was awesome. I have all these on MAME now, though, so I don't need to own any of these machines.
Nice. Nuclear Eclipse asks, this is John Reese, when will you record Neutral Season 2? My official answer is we've been recording it for the last 3 years in after shows of this show. My unofficial answer is not soon enough. John, let's go to you first.
Well, you answered it. There's no Neutral Season 2. You're listening to it. This is it.
Yep.
Done and done. Krusty the Clown writes, do you think an iOS laptop would be a viable product, i.e. an iBook? I was hoping Apple would announce it at WWDC, but it didn't happen. Isn't that kind of what an iPad Pro is? Like, I understand, or well, I presume that Roger Escobar's person who wrote in is asking, something that has the physical, like, connected keyboard and screen that you can never, separate the two. I feel like an iPad Pro is so close to there that it's.
Oh, it's so
I don't
not.
see really. Is it not? Okay, so I've never owned an. Okay, well that's the thing. I've never owned an iPad Pro. So learn me to show me why I'm wrong.
Yeah. So I've now had the 9.7 Pro and the 10.5, and I keep it always in the keyboard cover, almost all the time, the Apple keyboard cover. And there are other keyboard covers that kind of make it a little bit more laptop like, but they're mostly not that great. For the way some people use it, and I'm one of these people, I would use that. I would buy that product because I always want the keyboard. The keyboard is what made iPads usable for me. It's simple as that. Like, I do occasionally like go on the couch and fold the keyboard back behind it and try to use it without it, and I hate it. I always end up like folding it back out and like trying to use it on my lap, which is awful because it's all floppy and like back weighted and everything. So I would say this is not a huge market probably, but if they did it, I would certainly buy it that way because iOS for me, part of the reason why it feels so hobbled to me so often is the lack of a keyboard when I'm on my phone or when I'm on an iPad without that. So like that's why for me, like the keyboard really has made a huge difference for me in making iOS on the iPad and making the iPad worth having and worth keeping out in my kitchen all the time. So a clamshell version of that would be welcome, but I honestly I would be very surprised if they did it.
John?
This is whether it would be a viable product, and I think it totally would. Like, as iOS expands its functionality to solve some of the same problems that are currently only or best solved by a Mac today, it inevitably has to come into that area because it's a proven form factor. People like that form factor. It's just a question of, can you combine that form factor with a bunch of other things, software and battery life and cost and other trade-offs to make a compelling product? And yes, you totally can. Yeah, I think you could do it with iOS today, but certainly as iOS continues to get more sophisticated. So it would be a viable product. Whether or how soon Apple will do it, I don't know.
Chance Rubbage writes in to ask, more and more podcasts are going behind paywalls. Is it a good idea for Apple to enable a tip jar or in-app purchase for podcasts? I don't see how that could really work out, especially since it would presumably be locked to the Apple Podcasts app. And even if you could just magically snap your fingers and make that work across any podcast app anywhere, I don't know. I think it would help the smaller podcasts, but for something like us, I don't know that it would make, and not to say we're like, sorry, that implies that we're like a 99% invisible. We're not that either, but like a mid-level, if we can generously call ourselves that, like a mid-level show like this one, I don't know that it would make a big difference. Let's go to John first.
Apple implementing it is the problem here because having a way for people to do a tip jar or in-app purchases for podcasts, that would be a good thing because the ability to do more business models more easily lets different shows find different ways to fund themselves. Depends on the show and the audience and so on and so forth. But having it be an Apple thing is bad because one of the great benefits of podcasts is they're not owned and controlled by a single corporation to the degree that a lot of other things are. And so I wouldn't want Apple to do this because if they're wildly successful, it's a problem. And if they're not successful, then what the heck was even the point? You don't allow more business models. So I would love for there to be standards that, that clients would work with across multiple platforms, just like RSS is a standard that clients work with across multiple platforms to distribute podcasts. If there was a similar standard, a similar open cross-platform standard for enabling different kinds of business models, that would be great. But guess who's motivated to make such a thing? Not Apple, and not a lot of other companies too. So,
Marco,
I would say also like this question starts with the statement: more and more podcasts are going behind paywalls. This sounds like a big trend, but I don't think it is much of one really. I think the only podcasts that have actually succeeded in going behind paywalls, for the most part, are the ones that monetize their back catalogs that are fairly timeless, and that you can either use their own possibly paid app or pay for some membership to download like archived older episodes, but then the current ones are still free. That's a way more common thing. And even that doesn't work for every show. Like, that only works for shows that are timeless. It wouldn't work for a show like ours where we talk mostly about news. So like that whole, like, I don't think a lot of podcasts overall are going behind paywalls in the traditional sense of, like, you can't listen to this unless you pay us. The fact is, that's really hard. It's really hard to grow an audience if you're behind a paywall. You look around the whole rest of the web. Lots of news sites and everything have tried paywalls. Very few have succeeded because of this problem. And the ones that have these kind of porous paywalls where you can get a bunch for free up front, and then you might have to pay us or clear your cookies. Or you have to pay us to read all of our articles unless you come from Google or Twitter. Like, there's all sorts of, like, these holes because paywalls are really hard to make work. Podcasts have survived and thrived and grown all this time, driven almost entirely by advertising. The exact same way most websites have always funded themselves, for all the same reasons. That it's really, again, it's hard to grow an audience if you're making people pay on the way in, and it's generally easier to sell ads than to do that, and advertisers will typically pay more than your audience will. So I don't really think this is a big problem, either a trend that is happening or something that really needs to be explored that much. So that being said, if Apple were to enable tip jars or in-app purchases for podcasts, I have thought about doing this in Overcast before. I've talked to podcasters about it. The overall conclusion I have reached is that would be a very messy business to be in, and that for the most part, podcasters now, because there isn't a big centralized system run by Apple anywhere else, podcasters now have found ways to monetize their podcasts on their own. Ways that they own, ways that they control. People have Patreons, some people have memberships, some people just do ads like we do, some people do some combination thereof. But the point is that no one's involved. There is no middleman. There is no, Apple skimming 30% off the top and making everything go through them and disallowing everything else like the way there is in apps. There is no middleman. And when I talked to podcasters, when I was thinking about doing something like this in Overcast, the universal response was, we don't want anyone else handling our money for us. We don't want anyone else getting between our audience and us. Me or Apple or anybody else. Like, no one wanted that. And I would say, what if I started collecting money and I just distributed it to you, readability style? Like, would you go for that? And the universal response was kind of like, yeah, I guess I would take the money, but I wouldn't promote it because I would want, if I'm going to promote something, I want to promote my own membership thing on my own site or my own Patreon or whatever else. Everybody wanted to do their own thing with their own money, and they don't want middle people to come in and collect money on their behalf. You're not doing them a favor by doing that. So ultimately, I see why this question is asked, and it's going to keep being asked every 6 months for the next 10 years as everyone thinks about these things with podcasts. But I just don't think this is really a big problem, and I don't think anybody wants a huge middleman to come in and get in the way of between them and their customers.
And things like Patreon are a middleman as well, but they're divorced from podcasting. There's something about Patreon that is podcast specific. So it's just a question of how do you find a way to fund the thing that you're doing? And you have all these tools. I mean, Stripe is a middleman there. If they taking a percentage of your transactions or there's always going to be people taking a percentage of transactions. But in the world of podcasting, it's nice to not have, you have to do it this way because this is how podcasts are sold. You want to use Stripe, you want to use Patreon, you want to use Kickstarter, you want to solicit donations on your webpage and use any one of those services. None of those are tied to podcasting and are intrinsic to the podcast ecosystem or, force you to do something. Unlike, for example, the App Store, where Apple absolutely controls how you can how you can collect money for your applications.
Yeah.
Chris Adamson writes, what streaming services other than Netflix do you guys use? Does Syracuse have a Crunchyroll subscription? So actually, let's start with John, and then we'll end with me.
I saw this question I was trying to think of. I mean, I subscribe to Hulu. I subscribe to Amazon Prime. I do not have a Crunchyroll subscription, but I have had one in the past. Maybe there's other ones. Honestly, I thought about this the other day. I should catalog all the things I've subscribed to, because I am aware, right around the line eel style, of not having too many subscriptions. but they've been creeping in. Like, I mean, for things like Hulu, it's like, oh, I want to see The Handmaid's Tale, so I subscribe to Hulu. But now I just have a Hulu subscription forever because I find other shows that I want to watch. I already watched The Good Place on there. There's other things I'm going to watch on Hulu, right? This can't continue indefinitely because I will end up, I got to add up all those $5, $10, whatever dollars a month and see what they're at. Oh, it's HBO? Well, no, but that's part of my cable. I don't know. Too many, I guess, is my answer.
Fair enough. Marco?
For us, it's just it's Netflix and HBO Go or Now, whichever one is the one that doesn't require cable. Those two. That's it.
Yeah, for us, it's Netflix, and we are Amazon Prime members by virtue, or Prime Video members by virtue of Amazon Prime.
Oh, yeah, us too. Never use it.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, outside of the Grand Tour, we never use it, and I probably would have subscribed to Prime Video specifically for the Grand Tour and then regretted it because the Grand Tour was terrible. Let's see. Zelf writes in, do I have a real name here? Sorry, a little fancy spreadsheet doesn't catch real names. Zelf Ryden writes in, I'm standing in the computer store in my local mall before Christmas 1986. John, sell me on a Mac Plus over the Apple IIgs.
Oh, the pixels are the size of boulders on the Apple IIgs. The number of amazing games that you'll have to play on the Mac Plus will impress any Apple IIgs. Yes, I know the IIgs is color, but A, the Mac is the future, and B, the pixels are tiny, and C, the Mac has incredible amount of charm. Like, it's no contest. If you have the money, as they say, if you have the means, I highly recommend one. Do not do the Apple IIgs. It is a dead end.
That was Ferris Bueller, by the way. All right. Melvin Gundlach writes in, how did you initially meet, and what got you started making podcasts together? Bits and pieces of this story have been told many, many, many times in the past, so I'll try to give the chief summarizer-in-chief version. Marco and I met when we were little kids. Your parents or grandparents, it isn't entirely important, had a house that was on a small lake in upstate New York. My grandparents had a different house on the same small lake in upstate New York, and we would hang out over the summers because basically we were the only kids that were there. And we kind of fell out of touch, not in an angry way, just in a, we were kids and we grew up kind of way. And I think one of us would email the other from time to time over the years. And then shortly after, I think it was after we both got married, so not too terribly long after college, one of us reached out to the other. If I recall correctly, each of us blames the other for doing this in both the good way and the haha way. But anyway, somehow or another, we fell back in touch, and we just kind of rekindled our friendship from forever ago. So of the people that I still talk to, Marco and our now mutual friend, Brad Lautenbach, who works for Light, they are my two oldest friends that I've known for about the same amount of time, and it's been something like 20 years now. So fast forward to WWDC 2011, 2012, I forget which one it was. I want to say it was 2011. Marco and I are in line for the keynote, and I forget if John Syracuse walked up to us or Marco found John, but one way or another, John found us and we found John, and we hung out for the rest of the day, and then John and I kind of became friendly after that. And around the time that Build and Analyze ended in late 2012, I guess it was, I had started needling Marco about, hey, we should do a car show. We should do a car show. Even if nobody listens to it, it'll still be fun. We should do a car show. Spoiler alert, nobody listened to it. But anyway, Marco had the presence of mind to say, Hypercritical just ended. I wonder if John would do it too, because he likes cars. And so that's how Neutral got started. And then we would, as three nerds are off to do, we would start talking about nerdy stuff after the fact. And Marco, similar story, had the presence of mind to put that on SoundCloud, which by the time you listen to this may not even exist anymore. And so he put those episodes on SoundCloud, and we realized, well, people actually like when we talk about things we sort of know about, and people are not that interested in us pontificating about cars, of which we know nothing about. So maybe we should stop with the car thing and start with the tech thing. And that's kind of the super abridged version of how this all came to be. And so ATP really became a thing, I think, in March of 2013. And here we are in the middle of 2017. It's still a thing. So let's start with Marco. Any other thoughts to add? And then John after him.
Only that this is now one of the longest jobs I've ever held. Instapaper was longer.
You caught me while I was taking a sip of water. Oh my God. I almost died just now. Well done.
Yeah, Instapaper was about 5 years. So we're in year 4 now for this.
Does that mean the clock is ticking, or should I get worried?
No, I'll celebrate it again once this becomes the longest job I've ever held, which I'm pretty sure will happen. Then I will celebrate then.
Fair enough. John, any other thoughts?
I continue to protest the characterization of not knowing anything about cars. Speak for yourselves. I know a lot about cars.
Fair enough. I can't really argue with that. All right. Let's see. What else is good? What else is good here? Do you tape your webcams, gentlemen? John, do you put tape over your webcam?
Nope.
Same here. Marco, are you still, and this is a question from Mark. So Mark to Marco, are you still happy choosing Go for the Overcast backend?
Not really. But so first of all, only a very small part of the Overcast backend is in Go. Most of it is still PHP. There's simply a separate Go process for the feed crawlers. And it doesn't even do the whole process. It just pulls a whole bunch of feeds and fetches their contents for changes if they don't respond with cache headers. And then if it detects a changed feed, it then stuffs the contents of that feed into a queue, which is processed by PHP consumers. And the whole web app is all PHP. So I would not even say I have a Go backend. I have one Go component in the backend. And Go is an interesting language. I'm sure a lot of people like it a lot. I like it a lot for certain things, but it's very cumbersome to do complex things. So like it's really great for what I'm using it now for, which is like something that is a fairly simple task that you need to be really fast. You need to have a certain concurrency story there. But like, I would not want to write, now that I've gotten to know the language a bit enough to do this, I would definitely not want to write a whole web app of complexity using Go, just because simple things are cumbersome to do.
All right. We only have time for a few more because I'm about to die. And so let's choose a few. Oh, God, I'm so sorry. I don't know how to pronounce this, but Joshin Marshall, I'm so sorry. How did this year's ATP t-shirt campaign work out for you? I'm happy to share my not-so-good experience. This is another example of doing something nicely that could have taken a terrible turn. So the shirts are a tough thing, right? Because right now, we kind of have two choices. We can use a company that has a printing press, if you will, in Europe, but doesn't seem to do the best with fulfillment and oftentimes has problems. Or we can use a company that is only based out of the US, which kind of screws the Europeans, but is way more reliable. And we've fluttered back and forth between these two options. I will only speak for myself and say I will probably petition for the US only company next year and understand completely if like a $90 t-shirt is just too darn much money to ask for from the Europeans, because in some cases, like with import tax and VAT or whatever that stuff is called, it got to be unbelievably expensive. And I am deeply sorry for that. I really, truly am. But I'd rather have everyone have a good experience and just decide whether or not it's worth the money to them than having a really crummy experience. So this is your warning, Europeans, right now, that whenever we do t-shirts next, it's probably going to be expensive, and I am sorry. John, any other thoughts?
I don't think it was that bad this year. Like, we sold a lot of shirts, and there's some percentage where there's going to be problems. I'm more happy having the larger number of people who are happy with the shirt that they got across the whole world, even if it also means a proportionally larger number of people who are unhappy, because I'm presuming the unhappy people can at the very least get their money back. But it is a trade-off, and we've tried it both ways, and people complain either way, and who knows what we'll do. The problem is that this is not our core competency. We are not a t-shirt generating enterprise. We are a podcast generating enterprise that once a year does this silly thing with t-shirts. So the right way to do this is like, you got to do it all in-house, but we're not a corporation here. We're just three people. So every year, these three people try to figure out how to do t-shirts in a way that makes sense for everybody involved, and we have varying degrees of success. And guess what? We're going to try again.
Marco, any other thoughts?
I'm with you, Casey, and I would go a little further to say, so basically, I'll name names here. Cotton Bureau does great work. They have awesome quality. They have awesome people who are there, who help with the designs or often do the designs. They designed our ATP Rainbow M logo kind of thing. Like they designed that themselves without even us telling them. Like they are great. They do great work. But yeah, their international shipping is really expensive because they print here in the U.S. And so Teespring, which is what we used this year and a couple years ago also, Teespring has printers in multiple locations around the world. We've had lots of problems, though, with Teespring. So it is cheaper, and we actually make more money from the Teespring shirts, usually, I think. But I would go as far as to say right now on the record, I don't think I ever want to use Teespring again after this year. Because in the past, the quality issue was a single large mistake. It was like when we had that wrong font on the source code on the back of the shirt. Like that was a single large mistake that we worked with them. They corrected it. They sent everybody new shirts. It was one mistake, one big mistake that was fixable. This year, the problem, I don't know what has changed at Teespring. I know there was an article about they were having, layoffs or something, so I don't know what's going on over there. I don't pay attention. But this year, it was like a large number of different diffuse small problems. Like even like the shirts I ordered, I have bad printing on like 2 of the 4 shirts that I ordered. There were things like missing colors, things like misalignment where like the logo was slightly slanted instead of being aligned properly. Like stuff like that, just a lot of like small diffuse issues with Teespring this year that it seems like maybe they have more printers. I don't know what the deal is, but it was the kind of problem that you can't really just go to them and have them fix. You can't go to them and say, hey, like, a third of these shirts from random color combinations and places are weird in different ways, and they're all inconsistent. Like, they're not going to be able to fix that. So I would rather, going back to what Case said, I would rather have something that I at least know is a good product, that is at least coming out right and coming out, with high quality, even if it costs too much for some people to be able to justify. I'd rather sell that than to do what we had this year and see people sending in pictures of the shirt that they were so excited to get, and I see like it's missing a color, or it's slanted, or it's a bad print job, bad ink. Like that crushes me. So I cannot deal with that again. So I would not want to do Teespring anymore, and I don't care what it does. I'd rather not sell T-shirts than sell Teespring T-shirts again.
Yeah, I'm pretty similar in that feeling. Marco, since you were just talking, let's have you talk a little more. Why do you do all the ad reads? Yeah, that's by Phil Cohen, by the way.
I just kind of do. We never really talked about it. I just kind of do it.
That was exactly my answer. Yeah, it just was the way it started with neutral.
The short answer is that I don't want to do them, and Casey doesn't want to do them, and Marco does them.
Yeah,
and so neither of us are going to go, hey, Marco, can we do that thing that neither of us want to do? No, we're going to let Marco do it. So basically, it's because Marco is nice enough to do them, and Casey and I are nice enough to let him.
I think it started out that like I used to sell them directly myself at the beginning. So it started out that I was selling them, so it just made sense for me to also read them because I was talking to the sponsors and learning what they wanted me to say and everything else. These days, I think anybody could do it, but yeah, I do it and I don't mind doing it, and it's part of my workflow, and it's totally fine.
And also part of the thing, like this is true in a lot of relationship situations. Very often, there's one person that cares more about something than somebody else, and I have a feeling Marco cares more about the ad reads than either one of us do. Certainly more than I do. Yeah. The way how much tweaking he does to the ad copy and getting it so that he's happy with it. I think that is a factor. I think if either one of us did ad reads, we would do it in a way that Marco does not find satisfactory.
Definitely,
that is a good point. All right, I think this is going to be the last question, and it should be a good one. Hans Schrader writes in, I'm from Europe. Could John explain for a foreigner why he is so touchy on the subject of bagels?
No, I'm going to explain to Casey why he should select the question that I highlighted in yellow in the spreadsheet as our final question.
I can only see, but so much of the spreadsheet at once. My word. All right,
Row
I'm
100.
Sorry. Oh, I am nowhere near there. That's why I skipped it. Okay, so the answer to the question that John isn't answering is there are good bagels and there are things that vaguely resemble bagels, and John and I both have reasons to prefer. Actually, and Marco too.
Do you want me to actually answer this one? Because I can answer
sure.
it.
Yes, please do.
So this is a very simple thing. Everyone has foods that they eat growing up that are like regional or local to their family or whatever that they're nostalgic for. It's like, I want to have the X that I had when I was a child. That's a thing. And bagels are like that for me, only bagels are pretty widely regional to the New York metro area. So I grew up with the expectation that I can get bagels that taste in a certain way and pizza that tastes a certain way pretty much anywhere. And as, you know, a sheltered child who didn't travel too much, I assumed this was true everywhere in the United States. But then when I went off to college, I learned this is not true. And even just up a little bit farther north and east, everything I got that people called a bagel didn't taste like the things that when I was growing up. And I'd go back to New York and say, no, they're still there, but nobody else has them. And same thing with pizza. So it's basically, that's why it's important that bagels are made a certain way in the region where I grew up. And because that's the sort of their entry point into the U.S., they have some stake in saying this is the way the bagels are quote unquote supposed to taste, right? And that I can't get them where I currently live, so that's why I'm nostalgic for them. That's it. Same thing with pizza. Pizza is actually probably worse than bagels, but both of them I miss. But when I was on Long Island, I had both.
Yeah, it's reasonable for me.
Thanks to our sponsors this week, Betterment, Warby Parker, and Squarespace. And we will see you next week.
Now the show is over. They didn't even mean to begin, 'cause it was accidental. Oh, it was accidental. John didn't do any research. Marco and Casey wouldn't let him, 'cause it was accidental. Oh, it was accidental. And you can find the show notes at atp.fm. And if you're into Twitter, you can follow them at CASEYLISS. So that's Casey Liss, MARCOARMENT, Marco Arment, SIRAC, USA Syracuse. It's accidental. They didn't mean to. Accidental. Tech podcast so long.
All right, so the Zelda question is the one you want, John?
It's the one in yellow. I mean, it's not enough material for an after show, but yeah.
I can't tell. I have Flux on, so I can't tell what the hell is yellow right now.
Yeah,
God, I'm blind. Oh, God, I'm blind.
This is the problem. See, Flux is, I don't like those things. You can't even tell yellow.
Fair enough. All right. Vincent Skirved. I'll get this one day. Writes, what is the status on your Breath of the Wild progression? Did you finish every aspect of the game, etc.? As I did with most questions, I'll start this off. I still very much enjoy the game, but haven't played it in probably like a month and a half. I've just been incredibly busy lately and haven't had a chance to sit down with it. And also, I think we discussed on the show at some point, I am not very good at picking the game up and remembering exactly what I was doing when I put it down. So I'll have like a particular task or mission or thing I want to accomplish, which sometimes is like, you know, one of the official game tasks, but sometimes it's like, oh, I want to go and get myself ready for this game task by going across the map and doing such and such thing or whatever the case may be. And then I never write it down and completely forget. And then I get frustrated when I pick the game back up because I have no memory and need to like reestablish where I am and what I'm doing. That's my 2 cents. Marco, let's talk. Are you playing Zelda at all?
No, not at all.
Okay. All right, moving on to John.
Well, Marco can give us a tip update. How is she doing it?
I don't know.
/Adam.
They're playing it sometimes. I can't tell you how far they are. I have no idea.
Try to participate in your family, Marco. Sit down on the couch with them. They watch you play your stupid Sonic games.
No, I watch sometimes, but I have no idea how to communicate to you how far they are.
All right. So for me in Breath of the Wild, I don't usually 100% games. I have 100%ed many Zeldas. That series I play a lot. I like a lot. There's a chance I would have 100%ed Breath of the Wild if it wasn't for the Korok seeds. I don't think I'm ever going to do that. There's just too many of them. But I'm coming close to doing every non-seed thing in the non-DLC portion of the game, to the point where also doing things like having every possible armor set also fully upgraded. I'm getting close to that. It's within reach, and I might end up doing it. For the DLC, I did the Trial of the Sword. I did that, so my Master Sword is fully charged up to 60 all the time, which is awesome. It also lasts a much longer time. I did all of the side quests in the DLC, so I've done everything. I've 100% of the DLC, which was tiny, whatever. It's not a big deal. And like I said, I don't even have all the shrines left. I'm in the hundreds, but I'm within striking distance of 100%ing everything in the main game aside from the Korok seeds.